The sterile fluorescent lights of Sterling Technologies cast harsh shadows across the 42nd floor as Mike Rodriguez pushed his cleaning cart down the executive corridor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of heated voices spilled from behind the mahogany doors of the main boardroom, where the company's most powerful figures were locked in their quarterly merger discussions. Mike had cleaned these halls for 3 years, invisible to the men and women who shaped million-dollar deals just feet away from where he emptied their trash bins. Nobody at Sterling Technologies knew that the quiet janitor who arrived every evening at 10 o'clock had once held a scalpel instead of a mop. They didn't know that his calloused hands, now rough from industrial cleaners and floor wax, had once performed intricate surgeries that saved lives in the trauma ward of Dallas General Hospital. They certainly didn't know that Dr. Miguel Rodriguez had been considered one of the most promising cardiac surgeons in Texas before everything fell apart. The transformation from respected surgeon to night shift custodian hadn't happened overnight. 5 years ago, Mike's world had crumbled during what should have been a routine procedure. Despite following every protocol perfectly, despite years of training and countless successful operations, sometimes medicine failed in ways that haunted a person forever. The malpractice lawsuit that followed had destroyed not only his career but also his marriage, leaving him a single father struggling to rebuild his life from nothing. Emma Rodriguez, his 7-year-old daughter, was the only light that remained in Mike's darkened world. Every morning when he returned home to their small apartment in East Dallas, she would greet him with drawings she had made while he worked. Pictures of superheroes and princesses filled their refrigerator, each one signed with her careful handwriting that proclaimed, "For the best daddy ever." She never complained about their modest circumstances, never questioned why they lived differently than her classmates, and never knew that her father had once worn surgical scrubs instead of a janitor's uniform. The night shift at Sterling Technologies paid enough to keep them fed and housed, and Mike had grown comfortable with his invisibility. The executive staff barely acknowledged his presence as they hurried past him in the hallways, their expensive shoes clicking against the polished marble floors he maintained. He had learned to appreciate the solitude of his work, the meditative rhythm of cleaning and organizing that helped quiet the memories that still sometimes kept him awake. But on this particular Tuesday evening, as Mike approached the executive boardroom with his supplies, something felt different. The usual corporate chatter had been replaced by an urgent, panicked energy that made his instincts sharpen. Through the partially opened door, he could see CEO Robert Chen standing at the head of the conference table, his face flushed red as he gestured emphatically at the presentation screen. The merger with Pinnacle Industries represented the largest deal in Sterling's history, and the pressure had been building for weeks. Mike continued his routine, methodically cleaning the adjacent conference rooms while keeping one ear tuned to the escalating tension next door. He had become skilled at remaining unnoticed while working, a ghost who moved through the corporate world without disturbing its important rhythms. The executives were so focused on their high-stakes negotiations that they barely registered his presence as he quietly emptied wastebaskets and wiped down surfaces. The tension in the Sterling Technologies boardroom had been building for weeks, but tonight it reached a fever pitch that Mike could feel even from the hallway. As he worked methodically through his cleaning routine, he noticed the way the executives treated him with the casual indifference reserved for furniture. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Jennifer Walsh, the sharp-tongued HR director, had perfected the art of looking through him as if he were transparent. When she needed to pass by his cart, she would make an exaggerated gesture of annoyance, her designer heels clicking impatiently against the marble floor. David Thompson, the board chairman, was even worse. The silver-haired patriarch of Sterling's old guard had made his feelings about the cleaning staff abundantly clear during Mike's first week on the job. He had cornered Lisa Martinez, the evening receptionist, demanding to know why these people were allowed to work during business hours. The conversation had taken place just outside the supply closet where Mike was organizing his equipment, every word cutting through him like a surgical blade. Mike had learned to navigate these social landmines with practiced precision. He had perfected the art of becoming invisible, of moving through the executive floors without triggering the contempt that seemed to follow him like a shadow. His uniform, a simple navy blue jumpsuit with Rodriguez embroidered on the chest pocket, marked him as clearly as a scarlet letter in this world of tailored suits and Italian leather shoes. The executive saw the uniform first, and never bothered to look beyond it to the man underneath. The classism at Sterling Technologies was as polished and refined as everything else in the building. It came wrapped in corporate speak and delivered with professional smiles, but it was unmistakable nonetheless. During his 3 years of employment, Mike had overheard countless conversations that revealed how the company's leadership truly viewed their support staff. They spoke about efficiency measures and cost-cutting strategies, but what they really meant was that people like Mike were expendable, replaceable, barely worthy of consideration. Jennifer Walsh embodied this attitude perfectly. The 40-something executive had climbed the corporate ladder through a combination of ruthless ambition and careful networking, and she had no patience for what she considered the lower elements of the workplace ecosystem. Mike had watched her berate other cleaning staff members for minor infractions, her voice carrying the authority of someone who believed her MBA made her inherently superior to anyone who worked with their hands. The evening staff had developed their own strategies for dealing with this environment. They communicated through subtle glances and shared understanding, creating a network of mutual support that remained invisible to their supervisors. Carlos, who cleaned the lower floors, had warned Mike about Thompson's explosive temper. Maria, who handled the kitchen areas, had shared stories about Walsh's impossible standards and constant criticism. They all understood that their job security depended on remaining as unobtrusive as possible. Mike's medical background made these interactions particularly painful. He remembered the respect he had once commanded in hospital settings, the way nurses and administrators had deferred to his expertise and experience. The contrast between Dr. Miguel Rodriguez and Mike the janitor was a daily reminder of how far he had fallen, how completely his world had been turned upside down by circumstances beyond his control. The merger discussions had intensified the already challenging atmosphere. The executives were under enormous pressure to finalize the deal with Pinnacle Industries, and that stress trickled down through the organization in predictable ways. The cleaning staff had become convenient targets for the anxiety and frustration that the leadership couldn't direct at their actual problems. Mike had noticed the increase in complaints about trivial issues, the way small imperfections in their work were magnified into major problems. Thompson had been particularly difficult recently. The board chairman seemed to view the presence of service workers as a personal affront during such critical business discussions. He had made several pointed comments about maintaining appropriate security and confidentiality during sensitive negotiations, though everyone understood he was really expressing his discomfort with having outsiders in proximity to important corporate secrets. The irony wasn't lost on Mike. These executives who looked down on him with such disdain were often less educated about the human body than his 7-year-old daughter. He had overheard their conversations about health and medical issues, wincing at the misconceptions and outdated information they shared with complete confidence. They might have dominated the corporate world, but they would be helpless in a medical emergency, dependent on the very people they dismissed so casually. As Mike continued his work that evening, he noticed the increased security measures that had been implemented for the merger discussions. Additional guards had been posted throughout the executive floors, and access to certain areas had been restricted even for the cleaning staff. The message was clear. This was serious business for serious people, and service workers like Mike represented a potential security risk that needed to be managed and contained. The segregation extended beyond just physical spaces. The company had separate break rooms, separate entrances, and separate policies for different categories of employees. The executives enjoyed catered meals and premium coffee service, while the cleaning staff was relegated to a small break room in the basement, with vending machines and fluorescent lighting that flickered intermittently. The contrast served as a constant reminder of the social hierarchy that governed every aspect of life at Sterling Technologies. Mike had grown accustomed to the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered a room, the way important discussions were paused until he finished his work and moved on. He understood that his presence made these powerful people uncomfortable, not because of anything he did or said, but simply because he represented a class of person they preferred not to acknowledge. His existence challenged their carefully constructed bubble of privilege and exclusivity. The prejudice was so ingrained that it had become systematic and automatic. Security guards would scrutinize his identification badge more carefully than those of other employees. Supervisors would question his presence in certain areas, even when he was clearly performing his assigned duties. The assumptions about his intelligence, his background, and his capabilities were so deeply embedded in the corporate culture that they had become invisible to everyone except those who experienced them directly. Tonight, as the merger discussions reached their climax, these dynamics were more pronounced than ever. The executives moved through the halls with an energy that suggested they were on the verge of something momentous, something that would reshape the company and potentially their industry. In their minds, they were the architects of progress, the visionaries who would guide Sterling Technologies into its next phase of growth and success. Mike continued cleaning methodically, his movements efficient and practiced. He had learned to find satisfaction in the simple act of creating order from chaos, of transforming cluttered and dirty spaces into pristine environments where important work could be conducted. It was honest work that served a valuable purpose, even if that value wasn't recognized or appreciated by those who benefited from it most. The contempt he faced daily had taught him resilience and humility in ways that his medical training never could. It had shown him the true character of people when they believed themselves to be in positions of unquestionable authority. Most importantly, it had reinforced his commitment to treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their position or circumstances. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came as a sudden silence from the boardroom. Mike had grown accustomed to the rhythmic rise and fall of executive voices during these marathon sessions, the predictable patterns of corporate debate and negotiation. But this silence was different. It carried a weight that made his cleaning cloth pause mid-wipe across the conference table in the adjacent room. Robert Chen had been standing at the presentation screen for the better part of 2 hours, walking the board through the complex financial projections that would justify the Pinnacle Industries merger. The 62-year-old CEO had built Sterling Technologies from a modest startup into a billion-dollar enterprise through sheer force of will and an unwavering commitment to excellence. Tonight represented the culmination of months of careful planning and negotiation, the deal that would secure his legacy and position the company for unprecedented growth. The stress had been visible on Chen's face for weeks. Mike had noticed it during his evening cleaning rounds, the way the CEO's office stayed illuminated well past midnight, the accumulation of coffee cups and takeout containers that spoke to meals skipped and sleep deferred. The merger represented more than just a business transaction. It was Chen's masterpiece, his final act as CEO before the retirement he had been postponing for 3 years. The silence stretched for several seconds before it was shattered by the sound of something heavy hitting the polished conference table. Mike's medical training kicked in immediately, his body responding to auditory cues that would have meant nothing to most people but triggered instant recognition in someone who had spent years in emergency medicine. The sound was unmistakable, a human body losing consciousness and collapsing. Chaos erupted from the boardroom in waves. Jennifer Walsh's voice cut through the confusion with sharp, panicked commands that revealed how quickly her executive composure had crumbled. David Thompson was shouting for someone to call security, his authority reduced to helpless barking as he faced a situation that couldn't be resolved through corporate hierarchy. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor mixed with urgent voices as the most powerful people in the company confronted their complete helplessness in the face of a medical emergency. Mike abandoned his cleaning supplies and moved toward the boardroom, his mind automatically cataloging the sounds and voices that would help him assess the situation. Through the partially open door, he could see Chen's motionless form sprawled across the mahogany table, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his carefully styled hair disheveled. The presentation screen still glowed behind him, displaying profit projections that had suddenly become irrelevant. The board members stood frozen around the table like pieces in a chess game that had been suddenly abandoned. These titans of industry, who commanded respect and wielded enormous influence in their respective domains, were reduced to frightened observers watching their leader's life potentially slip away. Their expertise lay in market analysis and strategic planning, not in the immediate life-and-death decisions that were now required. Thompson was fumbling with his phone, trying to dial emergency services while simultaneously attempting to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. His hands shook as he spoke to the dispatcher, his normally commanding voice reduced to a trembling whisper as he struggled to provide coherent information about their location and the nature of the emergency. The man who routinely made decisions involving millions of dollars was paralyzed by the simple task of describing a medical crisis. Jennifer Walsh had taken charge of crowd control, ushering the junior executives away from Chen's collapsed form while simultaneously trying to coordinate their response. Her leadership training had prepared her for difficult personnel situations and complex negotiations, but nothing in her MBA curriculum had covered how to handle a medical emergency in the boardroom. She kept repeating instructions for people to stay calm while her own voice betrayed increasing levels of panic. Dr. Patricia Williams, the company's occupational health physician, was attending a conference in Denver and wouldn't be available for consultation. The corporate medical office was staffed only during regular business hours, leaving the evening skeleton crew without any official medical support. The nearest hospital was 15 minutes away during optimal traffic conditions, but downtown Dallas at this hour meant potential delays that could prove fatal. The security team that had been posted outside the boardroom was equally unprepared for this type of emergency. Their training focused on corporate security threats, unauthorized access, and basic crowd control. While they had received minimal first aid certification as part of their employment requirements, none of them had the expertise or confidence to take charge of a serious medical situation involving the company's CEO. Mike could hear someone mentioning CPR, but the discussion revealed how little the executives actually knew about proper emergency response. Their knowledge came from movies and television shows rather than medical training, and their suggestions ranged from ineffective to potentially dangerous. Time was becoming a critical factor, and their well-intentioned but uninformed attempts to help could make the situation worse. The merger team from Pinnacle Industries, who had been participating via video conference, watched helplessly from their screens as the deal they had been negotiating suddenly became secondary to human survival. Their lawyers and executives offered to terminate the call, but Thompson insisted they remain connected, perhaps hoping that maintaining some semblance of normal business operations would somehow stabilize the crisis. Chen remained motionless on the conference table, his breathing shallow and irregular. His face had taken on a grayish pallor that Mike recognized immediately as a sign of cardiovascular distress. The symptoms he could observe from the doorway painted a clear picture of what was happening, but the assembled executives were too panicked and too inexperienced to recognize the specific nature of the emergency they were facing. The minutes stretched like hours as the company's leadership grappled with their helplessness. These were people accustomed to having solutions for every problem, to commanding resources and expertise that could resolve any challenge. But medicine operated according to different rules, demanded different skills, and responded to different types of authority than the corporate world they dominated. Mike watched as precious time slipped away, while the executives debated their options and waited for professional help that might arrive too late. He could see the situation deteriorating, could recognize the signs that indicated immediate intervention was necessary. The irony was overwhelming. The solution to their crisis stood just outside their boardroom, invisible and dismissed by the very people who desperately needed his help. The sound of sirens in the distance provided some relief to the panicked executives, but Mike's medical experience told him that emergency responders would need several more minutes to reach the 42nd floor, even after they arrived at the building. Chen's condition couldn't wait for the formal protocols and procedures that would govern the paramedics' response. Every second of delay increased the risk of permanent damage or death. Thompson continued his attempts to coordinate the emergency response, while simultaneously trying to manage the business implications of the crisis. He was already thinking about public relations strategies and succession planning, his mind jumping between immediate medical concerns and long-term corporate stability. The merger negotiations would have to be suspended indefinitely, and the company's stock price would likely suffer when news of Chen's collapse became public. The weight of the moment settled over the boardroom like a suffocating blanket. These powerful executives, who were accustomed to shaping events and controlling outcomes, found themselves completely at the mercy of circumstances they couldn't influence through money, connections, or authority. Their leader lay unconscious before them, and all their collective expertise and resources seemed inadequate to address the immediate crisis threatening his life. Mike stepped through the boardroom doorway with quiet determination, his cleaning cart forgotten in the hallway behind him. The assembled executives turned toward him, with expressions ranging from confusion to outright irritation. In their minds, this was not the time for routine maintenance, and the presence of a janitor during their crisis felt like an intrusion into an already chaotic situation. "Excuse me," Jennifer Walsh snapped, her voice sharp with stress and authority. "This is a private emergency. You need to leave immediately and close the door behind you." Her tone carried the automatic dismissal that Mike had grown accustomed to over his 3 years at Sterling Technologies, but tonight, Something was different. Tonight, a man's life hung in the balance, and Mike's medical training overrode his learned deference to corporate hierarchy. "I can help," Mike said simply, his voice calm and steady despite the chaos surrounding him. He moved toward the conference table where Chen lay motionless, his trained eyes already assessing the CEO's condition from the subtle signs that would be invisible to untrained observers. The grayish pallor, the irregular breathing pattern, the way Chen's body had positioned itself during the collapse, all told a story that Mike could read like a medical textbook. David Thompson stepped between Mike and the fallen CEO, his face flushed with indignation. "Are you insane? This man needs professional medical attention, not some janitor playing doctor. Get out of here before you make things worse." His voice carried the authority of decades in corporate leadership, the tone of a man accustomed to having his commands followed without question. But Mike didn't retreat. Instead, he looked directly at Thompson with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced life-and-death situations countless times before. "Sir, I believe Mr. Chen is experiencing a myocardial infarction with possible arrhythmic complications. Based on his presentation, he needs immediate intervention, or he's going to die in the next few minutes." The medical terminology stopped Thompson mid-sentence. The specificity and confidence with which Mike had delivered his assessment was completely at odds with his appearance and presumed background. Jennifer Walsh stared at him with obvious confusion, her mind struggling to reconcile the janitor's uniform with the clinical language he had just used. "What did you just say?" Dr. Williams' voice came through the speakerphone from Denver, where she had been hastily connected to provide remote consultation. The company physician had been trying to guide the executives through basic first aid procedures, but Mike's assessment was far more sophisticated than anything she had expected to hear from the boardroom. Mike moved closer to Chen, ignoring the protests from the surrounding executives. "His pulse is thready and irregular, probably ventricular tachycardia transitioning toward fibrillation. His skin is cold and clammy, indicating cardiogenic shock. Without immediate intervention, he'll go into complete cardiac arrest within minutes." As he spoke, Mike's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking Chen's pulse points and assessing his respiratory status. "How do you know this?" Walsh demanded, her voice a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. "Who are you?" The question hung in the air as Mike continued his examination, his movements displaying a level of medical competence that seemed impossible given his apparent background. Thompson was fumbling with his phone again, trying to update the emergency responders about the new information Mike had provided. But his lack of medical knowledge made it difficult for him to accurately relay the technical details, and his panic was evident in his increasingly frantic attempts to communicate with the dispatcher. Mike looked up from Chen's motionless form and made a decision that would change everything. "My name is Miguel Rodriguez. I'm a trauma surgeon, or I was before I left medicine. I've handled hundreds of cardiac emergencies, and I know exactly what needs to be done right now." The revelation hit the assembled executives like a physical blow, reshaping their understanding of the situation and the man they had dismissed so casually. The silence that followed was deafening. These powerful executives, who prided themselves on their ability to read people and assess situations, realized they had completely misjudged the quiet janitor who had been working among them for 3 years. The uniform that had marked him as insignificant suddenly seemed like a costume concealing someone far more capable than they had ever imagined. Dr. Williams' voice crackled through the speakerphone with urgent authority. "Dr. Rodriguez, if you're really a trauma surgeon, then you need to take charge immediately. The paramedics are still several minutes away, and based on your assessment, Mr. Chen can't wait." Her willingness to defer to Mike's expertise provided the validation that began to shift the power dynamic in the room, but Jennifer Walsh wasn't ready to accept this dramatic reversal. "This is impossible," she protested, her voice rising with panic and disbelief. "You're a janitor. You clean our offices. How can you possibly be a doctor?" Her worldview was crumbling as she confronted the reality that someone she had looked down on for years might be the only person capable of saving their CEO's life. Mike didn't have time to explain his journey from respected surgeon to cleaning service employee. Instead, he began giving rapid-fire instructions that demonstrated his medical authority beyond any doubt. "I need someone to call the paramedics back and tell them we have a physician on scene managing a cardiac emergency. I need the automated defibrillator from the security office. And I need it now." Someone else needs to clear this table and get me some clean towels from the executive washroom. His transformation from invisible service worker to commanding medical professional was so complete and sudden that it left the executives struggling to adjust their responses. Thompson, who had been dismissing Mike's presence just minutes earlier, found himself automatically following the surgeon's orders. The authority in Mike's voice was unmistakable, carrying the weight of years of experience making life-and-death decisions under pressure. "David, get that defibrillator now," Mike commanded, using Thompson's first name with the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in medical settings. "Jennifer, I need you to coordinate with the paramedics and make sure they have elevator access to this floor. Everyone else needs to step back and give me room to work." The board members began moving with purpose for the first time since Chen had collapsed, their panic replaced by relief that someone competent had taken charge of the situation. But even as they followed Mike's instructions, they couldn't hide their amazement at the complete transformation of the man they thought they knew. Lisa Martinez, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Dr. Rodriguez, I remember you now. You operated on my father 5 years ago at Dallas General. You saved his life." Her recognition provided another piece of validation that Mike was exactly who he claimed to be, someone whose medical skills had touched lives throughout the Dallas medical community. Mike's hands moved with surgical precision as he prepared to administer life-saving treatment to the man whose company had employed him as a janitor for 3 years. The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone in the room. The CEO, who had never acknowledged Mike's existence, now depended entirely on skills and knowledge that had been hidden beneath a uniform and masked by assumptions about class and social status. As Mike worked to stabilize Chen's condition, the assembled executives watched in stunned silence. They were witnessing not just a medical emergency, but a complete reversal of their understanding about worth, capability, and the danger of judging people based on appearances. The man they had treated as invisible was revealing himself to be exactly the person they needed most in their moment of greatest crisis. Thompson stood nearby with the defibrillator, ready to assist the surgeon who had spent 3 years cleaning the floors he walked on. The power dynamics that had governed their interactions for years had been completely inverted, and the board chairman found himself grateful to serve under the command of someone he had never bothered to truly see. Mike's hands moved with surgical precision as he administered the defibrillation that brought Robert Chen's heart back into a stable rhythm. The CEO's eyes fluttered open just as the paramedics burst through the boardroom doors, their equipment clattering against the marble floors that Mike knew so well. Chen looked up at the circle of faces surrounding him, his gaze settling on Mike with growing recognition and confusion. "You saved my life," Chen whispered, his voice hoarse but steady, "but you're the janitor who cleans my office." His statement hung in the air like a question that demanded answers from everyone present. The assembled executives watched as their unconscious assumptions about hierarchy and worth crumbled before their eyes. The paramedics quickly took over Chen's care, but their lead technician turned to Mike with professional respect. "Doctor, your intervention was textbook perfect. You probably added 20 years to his life by acting so quickly." The acknowledgement from a fellow medical professional served as the final confirmation of Mike's expertise, removing any lingering doubts about his qualifications. As Chen was carefully loaded onto a stretcher for transport to Dallas General, he gripped Mike's hand with surprising strength. "I need to know your story," he said. "I need to understand how someone with your skills ended up cleaning my floors instead of saving lives in an operating room." The request carried weight beyond curiosity. It was the beginning of a reckoning that would reshape everyone's understanding of the man they had overlooked for years. In the days that followed Chen's recovery, the story of Mike Rodriguez spread through Sterling Technologies like wildfire. The executives who had witnessed the emergency couldn't stop talking about the dramatic reversal of their expectations, the way their janitor had transformed into their savior in a matter of minutes. But the real transformation was happening within the company's leadership structure itself. Jennifer Walsh found herself unable to look at any service worker the same way again. The woman who had perfected the art of looking through people based on their uniforms was forced to confront the ugliness of her own prejudices. She began making an effort to learn the names of the cleaning staff, to acknowledge their contributions to the company's success. The change was awkward at first, but it represented a fundamental shift in how she viewed the people around her. David Thompson struggled with his own revelation about class and judgment. The board chairman who had complained about these people working during business hours now understood that his assumptions had nearly cost Chen his life. He initiated a company-wide review of how Sterling Technologies treated its support staff, including improved wages, benefits, and recognition programs that acknowledged the essential nature of their work. But the most profound changes came from Robert Chen himself. During his recovery, the CEO spent hours learning about Mike's background, discovering the malpractice lawsuit that had destroyed his medical career despite his exemplary record. Chen learned about Emma, about the single father who worked night shifts to provide for his daughter while carrying the burden of skills that could save lives but were trapped by circumstances beyond his control. 2 weeks after his heart attack, Chen called Mike into his office for a conversation that would change everything. "I've spoken with the legal team about your situation," Chen began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had looked death in the face and emerged with new priorities. "The malpractice case against you was built on questionable evidence and prosecutorial overreach. With the right legal support, we can have your medical license reinstated." Mike stared across the desk at his former patient, struggling to process what he was hearing. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate everything you're trying to do, but I can't afford that kind of legal battle. And even if my license were restored, I don't know if I'm ready to practice medicine again." The trauma of his departure from surgery ran deeper than legal complications. It had shaken his confidence in ways that would take time to heal. Chen leaned forward with the intensity that had built his business empire. "Sterling Technologies is establishing a new corporate medical center, and I want you to head it up. Full salary restoration to your previous level, complete legal support for license reinstatement, and a facility where you can practice medicine while also developing occupational health programs for our employees." The offer was comprehensive, generous, and completely unexpected. The proposal represented more than just a job opportunity. It was a chance for Mike to reclaim the identity he had lost 5 years earlier. But as he considered Chen's offer, his thoughts turned to Emma, to the life they had built together in their small apartment, to the simple routines that had become their foundation. "I need time to think about this," Mike said. "And I need to talk to my daughter." That evening, Mike sat with Emma at their kitchen table, surrounded by her latest drawings of superheroes and princesses. He explained the offer in terms she could understand, watching her face light up with excitement about the possibility of her father becoming a doctor again. But her next words surprised him with their wisdom and insight. "Daddy, would you be happy being a doctor again?" Emma asked, her 7-year-old voice carrying genuine concern for his well-being. "Because you seem happy when you come home from work now. You tell me stories and help me with my drawings. Will you still have time for that if you become a doctor again?" Her questions forced Mike to examine his motivations and priorities in ways he hadn't expected. Mike realized that his years as a janitor had taught him lessons about humility, resilience, and human dignity that his medical training never could have provided. He had learned to find satisfaction in honest work, to appreciate the simple moments with his daughter, to understand that worth wasn't determined by profession or social status. These insights had made him a better person, even if they had come at great personal cost. After a week of careful consideration, Mike returned to Chen's office with his decision. "I'll accept your offer," he said, "but with conditions. I want to split my time between the medical center and continuing some of my custodial work. I want Emma to understand that all honest work has dignity, and I don't want her to think that being a doctor makes me more valuable than the person who cleaned these floors." Chen agreed to Mike's unusual request, recognizing the wisdom in his approach. The Sterling Technologies Medical Center opened 6 months later with Dr. Miguel Rodriguez as its director, but employees often found him emptying trash cans or mopping floors during his off hours. It became a powerful symbol of the company's new commitment to treating all employees with equal respect and dignity. The story of Mike's transformation became legendary within Sterling Technologies, but its impact extended far beyond the company's walls. Local media picked up the story, and it spread across social networks as a powerful reminder about the danger of judging people based on appearances or circumstances. Medical schools began using Mike's case study to teach students about resilience and the importance of maintaining their skills even during career interruptions. Emma Rodriguez grew up understanding that her father was simultaneously a respected surgeon and a humble janitor, that both roles had value and dignity. She learned that worth came from character and compassion rather than titles or salaries. Her drawings evolved to include pictures of doctors and custodians working side by side, reflecting her understanding that all contributions to society deserved recognition and respect. Years later, when Emma entered medical school herself, she would often speak about the lessons her father had taught her through his journey from surgeon to janitor and back again. She understood that true healing required not just medical knowledge but also humility, empathy, and the wisdom that came from experiencing life from multiple perspectives. The weeping angel may have been restored with a toothpick, but Mike Rodriguez had restored something more valuable: the understanding that every person possesses hidden depths, that dignity transcends profession, and that the most important transformations happen not in boardrooms or operating rooms, but in the human heart. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.